Hey you guys, I got the coolest birthday present this year. Look, isn't this cool? Okay, so once I get my office put together, which is my goal after I get 1,000,000 houses renovated, I'm gonna hang this up. But until then, I'm so excited to show you the coolest birthday present I got this year. So nice, thank you Alex and Autumn, I love it. Oh, I'll leave it on because I'm on air. I gotta leave it going, so I'll put that behind me. Let's see. Doo-doo-doo. I'm gonna set it here. All right, today I wanna talk to you guys about the BRRRR method or the BRRRR strategy. Now, if you are new to real estate investing, this may be something you're starting to see and maybe a term you're starting to hear about and maybe you don't fully understand it. If you are an experienced real estate investor, you may have been doing this and not even known it had a name. So what the BRRRR strategy is something I'm pretty sure that BRRRR, so BRRRR is a cool website. They have a lot of free resources for real estate investors. They also have resources that you have to pay for, but there's a lot of good information for people that are wanting to get into the real estate investing game. They have cool forums where you can ask questions, and they have webinars you can sit through, some paid, some free, but it's just a cool resource. I'm pretty sure that they're the people that first coined the term BRRRR. I could be wrong, so if I am and you know who originally came up with it, please comment below so we can give the appropriate person credit. But basically what the BRRRR strategy or method is it stands for a few things. So the B is buy, the R is renovate, and they're in a special order. So buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and repeat. So you start by buying the property, and depending on your strategy or your budget, you could either buy a really rough property in cash. Properties are in really bad condition. They are generally not financeable by traditional financing. So sometimes people will buy, for example, I once bought a property in cash for $45,000 because a bank would not loan on that property because of certain things that needed to be repaired to make it financeable. So you can either buy a property in cash, or you can just buy a property that is potentially financeable, but you know that if you renovate it or make repairs to it, you can make it exponentially more valuable. So you buy the property with a loan or with cash, you renovate the property to increase the value. And this is where you have to be smart and plan with your numbers, is can you increase the value enough to where you'll have enough equity in it where you can pull money back out? Because once you renovate it, you're going to rent the property out, and then you're going to refinance the property. Meaning maybe you bought a house, for example, for $100,000, you did a lot of work to it, you made it much more valuable, and now that house is worth $250,000. You can pull some of your equity back out of that property and then use that money to reinvest in another property. So that's where the repeat comes in. Now there's a couple things that I want to point out in this strategy that really matter as you go through the process. So I have kind of some notes here so I stay in my right order of the BRRRR strategy. So when you renovate, you have to make sure that you are picking renovations that are increase your value. And if you are not experienced in real estate, this is something you have to be super careful about. As a real estate broker, I have people come to me all the time that have done things to their home that they think make their property more valuable, but they don't actually increase the value. There are things that are going to make a house nicer, and maybe a renter is going to be more likely to want to rent your property, or a buyer, I lost my light. Or a buyer is going to be more likely to want to buy your property, but it doesn't necessarily increase value. So this is where you want to talk to somebody who's knowledgeable. If you're not, maybe it's paying for a consultation with a real estate broker. Maybe it's paying for a consultation with, even better yet, an appraiser, in all honesty. And making sure that the things you're doing are adding the value that you expect them to be adding, because this is what we really want to do, is add enough value here. Then you're going to rent it. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. If you house hack, meaning if you buy a house, you fix it up while you live in it, and then you rent it out later, you're gonna be able to have some loan incentives that you wouldn't be able to have if you just buy it as an investment property, and then it's always an investment, and then you rent it to somebody else. For instance, I once BRRRR'd a house kind of unintentionally. I bought the property because it was a multi-unit property. I lived in one of the units while I renovated everything. And because I bought it as an owner-occupant, I was required to put a much lower down payment on that property. As I renovated the property and I fixed it up and I made it nicer, I lived in it, and I actually refinanced it before I moved out of it simply because interest rates were better. Now, every loan is going to have certain rules. And so if you refinance a property as an owner occupant, sometimes you have to stay in it for 1 year or 2 years before then you could move out and rent it, and just double check with your lender that you're not in violation of any of those terms. But I knew that eventually I was going to want to rent that property out. But I refinanced it when I had a decent amount of time left to go, so I fell within that parameter. So I was able to refinance that property as an owner occupant, meaning I got a much lower interest rate than as an investor. An investment property is going to always have a higher interest rate than an owner occupant home. So I renovated it during the process, or I refinanced it during the process of the renovation. Now, sometimes you can and can't do that, because if the house is all torn apart and you have no electrical and you have no sewer, or you're really doing hardcore renovations, you're not going to be able to go traditional financing. But if you're doing a lot of cosmetic stuff or things that are just like nice things you would want to do in a home you lived in, this is very possible. If not, you might have to do it after you move out and have a little bit higher interest rate, but that's okay as long as it's budgeted into your plan. Now, when you go to refinance, here's something you have to think about: is where are interest rates going to potentially be, and how is that going to impact your investment? So for example, I have a property right now that I purchased and I didn't know, would it be a rental property? Would I flip it and sell it? What would be my long-term plan? And I was kind of just waiting until I was done to see what the market did. But as I look at the market and I see it's harder and harder for people to find good rental properties, and there's not as much property available, I am much more hesitant to sell properties as a flip. I think long term it's always better to hold on to them. So this, what would have maybe been a flip property, I will probably end up holding on to it. You might not want to refinance it today because interest rates aren't great. And so for instance, this property I have purchased in cash. It was one of those non-financeable properties. I have put a lot of capital into it, and I probably don't want to refinance it today when interest rates aren't great, unless another awesome opportunity came up and I wanted to finance this property to pull some equity out so that I could put that money into another property. But you do have to think about how refinancing it at really high interest rates may impact your investment and adversely impact what your original plan had been. So it's just something to keep in mind as you look at the trajectory of your investment. Now, the other thing you have to keep in mind at this refinance step is, are you putting enough equity into your house? So I've heard people say, oh, well, just pull value out of your property and pull your equity out of your property, and then you can invest it in something else. Well, the equity has to be there. The other thing is, sometimes investors will use their own personal home. They have a lot of equity in it, and they'll do a home equity line of credit, and then they'll use that money to invest in another property. The equity just has to be there. Pay attention to what you owe on your home versus what the value of the home is today, because say you have a $300,000 house and you owe $290,000 on it, well, then there's no equity to pull out. You're going to have a certain ratio for every lender and loan type that they'll say you have to have this percentage paid down to be able to pull this amount out. So you have to make sure the equity is there and the value add is there, so the rehab value exists for you to be able to pull the money back out. So then repeat. So there's people that do this. They buy a house, they renovate the house, they rent out the house, they refinance the house. Then the money they pulled out, that's now the down payment or the purchase price for the next house they buy. And they just do it over and over and over again. And the nice thing is if you can save up enough money to start and do this once, usually you don't have to save all this extra money to do it again and again and again, because you just keep stepping and using the money. This is the worst light, guys. You keep stair-stepping and using the money from the last one to invest in the next one and doing it over and over again. Meanwhile, you're still, even though you have a loan on the previous rental property, it's cash flowing because you didn't pull all the value out. You're still making sure you cash flow every month on your prior investment properties. So this is a really good strategy, and you may even be doing it without realizing you're doing it. There's tons of resources on it, but so if you hear the term BRRRR Method, BRRRR Strategy, this is what they're talking about, and that's how you do it, and it's a great way to get into investing today. So one of the best things you can do even is with your starter home, do it it that way. So you buy the first home you're gonna live in, you make sure to buy something that's under what you can afford so you're not putting yourself in a tough, tight situation. You make that home nicer and increase the value while you live into it. And then when you're ready to upgrade to, maybe you start with a 1-bedroom house or a 2-bedroom house, and then your family grows and you're ready to upgrade to your next home, you keep your starter home instead of selling it to buy the next one. You keep that, you pull some value out, and then you go on to the next one, and then just keep going.